Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're having a great weekend. Our library tour is continuing as the Shelfie Safari heads to the lower depths, to the gutter. Because we're talking crime fiction, one of my great passions as a reader, passion of my wives. We both loved crime fiction before we ever met, and so some of these are some of my favorite books, some of her favorite books, and I'm excited to get into them. And these actually are the lower depths. I mean, we're talking about a lower bookshelf right over here. So let's investigate. Let's find out who's on this shelf. Up first, Ross Mcdonald, the great Ross Mcdonald, real name Kenneth Millar. He was married to Margaret Millar, fantastic crime novelist in her own right. But Ross Mcdonald's character, of course, is Lou Archer, and so this is Archer in Jeopardy and Omnibus. One of the great aspects of the Lou Archer books, which I highly recommend this series, is that they take place across over 20 years, so the very late 1940s up through 1970. And so we see a private detective, but we see him dealing with a world that is changing, a society that is changing. How is California changing, and how he's processing these things. And so it's fantastic. What's cool about the Omnibus edition, so the Doomsters is amazing. Maybe McDonald's best early book. And then it goes into the zebra-striped Hearse, which is from sort of his middle period, as he starts to focus more on the idea of like the sins of the father, sins of the mother, family tragedy, psychology within great crime detective fiction, and then The Instant Enemy, which is a later book. And so you get an omnibus like this gives you a sense of that full sweep that occurs within the Lou Archer series. Highly recommend it. There's also Archer at Large and Archer in Hollywood. I don't have either of those because I had the books that were in them before I ever found these omnibus editions, but highly recommend Ross Mcdonald. Up next, another omnibus, Charles Willeford. Someone who is not read or discussed nearly as frequently as many of his peers. If this shelf is the lower depths, one of the books in this volume, Pickup, is probably the lowest depth. It feels almost like darker than David Goodis. And I think the cover here with the woman and the man in the bar and the car in the background and just how sweaty it all feels, that's pure Willeford. So Pickup is dark, it is nihilistic, it is brutal. And it's set in San Francisco, and it's an amazing portrait of San Francisco, but is a very dark novel. It is also anthologized in the Library of America's crime novels of the 1950s. This volume also includes The Burnt Orange Heresy, which it doesn't feel like a crime novel. It's a send-up of art, the art world, art criticism at large, but it's tense. And as it unfolds with this character who's like trying to figure out what's going on with this super secret avant-garde painter and what's his latest masterpiece and what's going on, as he's exploring all of these things, the tension builds until ultimately it reveals itself to be a crime novel. It's very short. And then the last book in here would be Cockfighter, one of humanity's like vilest activities, certainly not a sport. It was filmed by Monty Hellman, who did Two-Lane Blacktop, in the shooting in Ride the Whirlwind, not Read the Whirlwind. Westerns with Jack Nicholson, and Warren Oates. Warren Oates plays the titular character, the cockfighter who takes a vow of silence after his prize rooster is damaged in cockfight. Willeford's books are dark. He definitely depicts characters who are sort of beyond that fringe. You know, a lot of great crime fiction deals with characters who are right at the fringe of society and like crime, and they weave in and out. And Willeford's books definitely feel like they've shifted over that line, as have the books of David Goodis. But they're both great. Up next, I have one of my favorite writers. On any given day, maybe my favorite spy novelist. Certainly in my top three probably at any time. That would be the great Len Dayton with the Secret File series. The Ipcress file is my favorite. It's the first. It's amazing. The spycraft is not sexy. It is workmanlike. It is hard work. It is dangerous. And we have this nameless spy who's involved in the Cold War, and it's marvelous. It is just an immersive book to read, and this one's fantastic. It was filmed with the first the Secret Files that deal with the Cold War were filmed with Michael Caine in the key role. Very hard to find though. I don't know that they were really widely released, at least in the U.S. on DVD, and they rarely are streaming. Funeral in Berlin. Ipcress File is my favorite, but Funeral in Berlin might be his greatest spy novel. It is incredible. It deals with trying to capture a scientist. This is great. And then there's also, you know, the traitor, the double agent, the fake traitor, all those things. And one of the things that's marvelous about this book is the way that each of the chapters begins with sort of this quote about chess strategy, gambits, sacrifice pawns, and the constant theme of like, what is a person willing to sacrifice, what is a government or an organization willing to sacrifice, and how there is no moral spy agency in any society. But this is a marvelous book. And then Billion Dollar Brain, which has a perfect cover of the grenade in the doll. And this is an interesting Cold War novel because it shows a different side of the Cold War. We have our spy, our British spy, who's not going up against communists who want to start World War III, but someone on the other side. Someone on the other end of that spectrum, an erstwhile ally. And so this is, again, a fascinating book. Not quite as tightly plotted and just feeling like almost propulsive in terms of the danger that the other two have, but it's great. I also have Hearse Underwater, which is secret file number 2, and that deals with a submarine from World War II and, you know, secrets from that era. It's great. It's probably the most thrilling of the 4 secret file books, and a book I love. The problem is that the cover of it is beautiful. It's got this dark green, almost like a peacock green, and when my wife and I were redesigning one of the rooms in the house, we wanted to use that as a paint color. And in the design process, somewhere misplaced the book over a year ago. I haven't been able to find it. I also have Declarations of War, which is his book of short stories. These feel just as authentic and lived in as his spy novels. And then Close Up, which I have not read. I acquired much more recently, but sounds fascinating. It deals with Hollywood and a biographer and mysteries and secrets and sort of that seamy side. So I'm fascinated to read this. If anybody has read this, please let me know if it's any good. I'm excited. Kogans Trade by George V. Higgins, great Boston crime novel, topped only by Higgins' true other masterpiece, The Friends of Eddie Coyle. And the Boston mob is just so different from the New York mob, or like the Godfather, that, you know, sense that we have. These books they pack a punch, literally. Kogans Trade, some people might be familiar with it from the title Killing Them Softly, which was the name of a more recent adaptation. And if you're familiar, there's a poker game that was heisted, card game that was heisted, and Cogan's brought in by the Boston mob to take care of it. All he needs is his Smith & Wesson and the 5 shots that are in it to put things right. It is violent, it is dark. Friends of Eddie Coyle, though, is on another shelf because it's a mass market paperback. It's amazing. Walter Mosley, another great crime fiction writer, and one I love. Like the Lou Archer series, the Easy Rawlins series is great because it takes us on this sweep of about 20 years. So in Devil in a Blue Dress, we're in 1948. Easy Rawlins has never been a private detective. He becomes one in this book. It also introduces Mouse. I read this in March. Mouse is this absolutely terrifying character who is small but deadly, and a critical character throughout the series. I read this in March. I'll link that video in the description box below. Probably my favorite of Mosley's books would be White Butterfly, in part because it examines that question around how a victim's identity determines the effort of the investigation into, you know, how that human being's life ended. And Mosley does that without ever being preachy. The characters are reflecting on it. They are realizing this, reflecting on it, and trying to do something about it. And Rawlins is trying to do something about it. So this is a very strong book. And then with Black Betty, we're up to 1961. And we start to see how Easy's life has changed. 13 years later, does he have a family? What's his family like? Something that we don't see too often in detective fiction. Usually the detective remains unmarried or divorced or whatever throughout the series. That's something that Mosley is not going to have us, you know, see. Next, the great Mickey Spillane. Got a couple of, again, omnibus editions. And Mickey Spillane's character is Mike Hammer. Great comic book name for a crime detective. And Mike Hammer, these books are very much police procedurals, except that it's a private detective. And Mike Hammer, who can do the things the law can't. Some of these have the original like pulp edition covers on the back. But this first one is great. I, the Jury, is a dynamite. It moves, it kicks, it is furious. And my camera yells a lot. My Gun is Quick, though, is possibly Spillane's most astute crime novel. It feels almost closer to Ross McDonald's Lou Archer books than many of the other Spillane books. Vengeance Is Mine is weak. If you've read it, you'll know why it's my least favorite. That's not one that I really would recommend. But the second edition, again, has the cool pulp covers on the back. But this one has two of his more famous books. It has one, Lonely Night, which is excellent. But it also has The Big Kill, which I think is one of the ones that is more frequently read, in part just because of its title, not because of its contents. But then it also has Kiss Me Deadly, which is probably Spillane's most famous book, in large part because of the great adaptation with Ralph Meeker as Mike Hammer. Cloris Leachman's in an early role for her. And that's a great film, and this is a great book. Kiss Me Deadly, if you've only ever seen the film, I would recommend trying out the book. It might be a window into a new favorite crime novelist. Collection 3 does not have the cool pulp covers. And this is a book that, this collection starts to reveal the other side of the Mike Hammer series, which is that initially the books feel very much like police procedurals that are more violent and a little darker and they're sexier and they have more swearing and stuff like that. Later on, Mike Hammer goes through life, like there's relationships that matter, but the plot's increasing. There's a little bit more violence. There's a little bit more darkness. There's a little bit more weird. And so if that's your thing, then the later books are fantastic. That might not be everybody's thing, but I would certainly recommend the first 2 volumes. A sort of local writer, C.B. McKenzie's Bad Country, set in southern Arizona, capturing the landscape, the culture of southern Arizona. And I'm not just talking about like Tucson, but the culture, Mexican culture within Arizona, Mexican-American culture within southern Arizona and in Tucson is captured so well here. The weird political lines that exist in southern Arizona is captured really well here. This is a very good book. This was a Christmas gift from my wife. It surprised me, and I loved it. It was also a winner of the Tony Hillerman Prize. We'll see Tony Hillerman on a later shelf. One of my all-time favorite novelists. A later book, Burn What Will Burn, also by C.B. McKenzie. This one is more Ozark noir. I believe it's set in Arkansas, and deals with and it's good. I think my wife and I both preferred Bad Country, but this one also has an amazing author photo. I probably should have dressed like this for the video, but oh well. Diving into some last books here. We've got Negatives by Peter Everett. I acquired this book not too long ago, in the past year. I'd never heard of it, so please let me know if you have, and if you think it's good. I'm looking forward to reading. I discovered it based on comparisons to, I believe, Ted Lewis, but possibly also Derek Raymond. 2 British crime writers I absolutely love. So I'm looking forward to reading Negatives. Very macabre book from what I understand. The Great London Blues by Anthony Frewin, and published by No Exit Press. This is a cool book. This is a really cool book. The Blues refers to blue films, adult films, in the 1950s and 1960s. This book connects to the Profumo affair in the 1960s, the sex scandal that rocked the British government and were, important state secrets shared and divulged. And so those aspects are fascinating. But what's really interesting is the key character, Tim Purdom, who's the filmmaker, who's involved in this book. He's fascinated by jazz music, and so we're constantly finding out what jazz records he's putting on, what he's listening to, which Thelonious Monk album does he have going, and so that just lends this strange color to this book that gives it this other sense, this detail, this 3-dimensional authenticity that I really enjoyed. I thought it was. I didn't know much about the Profumo affair or the scandals, but this was a window into that, but also a window into Soho and pre-swinging 60s London. as it's becoming swinging London. So it's fascinating. James Carlos Blake, sometimes compared to a poor man's Cormac McCarthy. If you enjoy Cormac McCarthy, or if you enjoy crime fiction but don't enjoy Cormac McCarthy, you might like James Carlos Blake. Redgrass River is one of his two really great books, I think. It's based sort of in real history, and that's something that Blake tries to do, I think, in a number of his best books, is he goes into like the real actual criminals or figures and unfolds some novel around them. And so this is set in the 1910s, during World War I, and then during Prohibition in Florida. It's swamp noir. And we have the Ashley gang. And the book really deals with the conflict between a local police officer, a local sheriff, and John Ashley, who leads the Ashley gang. And the ways in which over close to 20 years, they're constantly one-upping each other in terms of, arrest, escape, capture, disgrace, and the violence and the animosity between them, how it builds to its climax, a real-life climax. But again, it's a sweaty book. It's a grimy book. But it works. It works on a lot of levels. And then The Killings of Stanley Ketchel, which is fascinating. Again, we get some real-life characters. We get an aged Emmett Dalton of the famous Doolin and Dalton gang who got wiped out. He was the only survivor, and he has been released from prison. So he's this octogenarian walking around in it. Stanley Ketchel, who was a real-life boxer, the Michigan Assassin, and a middleweight who, after Jack Johnson in real life, had become the world's first black heavyweight champion and defended himself quite well in a boxing match. Ketchel trained to fight him, and they had a fight. And was it fixed? Was there supposed to be a fix that one or both of them decided to break? And this book explores that, but it explores much more. It explores the worlds of mining and railroad towns up in the northern United States. It explores, of course, the boxing circuit, but first sort of the journeyman's level, and then building up to the world fame that Ketchel acquires. Explores Jack Johnson and his world. Now, one thing that should be noted is that the characters within the book and in real life, people hated Jack Johnson. The idea that there was a black guy who was the heavyweight champion of the world infuriated people. The racism he encountered was, deep and visceral. And so that's present in the book. But this isn't a book that delights in the racism of that society or of the characters, but it's a book that does depict it. But this is an intense book, and again, it does mirror the real life and the real life fate of Stanley Ketchel, which I will not divulge, though Wikipedia would. And then finally, we'll close out with a pair from the great James Ellroy, The Black Dahlia, the first of the LA Quartet, based again on a real life crime, mesmerizing book, and The Big Nowhere, which I included on my list of 5 perfect novels that aren't even the writer's best books. This is a strange and horrifying book that can also be delightful, and introduces one of Ellroy's favorite concepts, which is the multiple interweaving narrators who show us different sides of the same investigation or the same crime and withhold information from each other, even though we, the reader, get to appreciate it. And so this is set in 1950 Los Angeles. I love this book. Someone, when I did the Where Not to Start with James Ellroy, and I talked about how this might be one of the secretly the best place to start, had pointed out that Danny Upshaw might be one of the greatest characters ever in noir. So that was crime fiction. So let me know if you've read any of these. Again, I'm looking forward to reading Close Up by Len Dayton. I'm looking forward to reading Negatives by Peter Everett sometime in the near future. And I hope everybody's having a great week. Thank you.